Welcome to a very special edition of eCommerce Australia. This one is an absolute must listen. Australia Post today have released their State of eCommerce report for 2026, and we get special access to Jordan Berke. Now, Jordan is founder of a global retail consulting firm based out of New York, but he's down here for Australia Post to talk to some of Australia's biggest e-commerce businesses into what the report actually means. Now, to get the report, there's a link in the show notes. Some of the topics and some of the insights that the report has produced, Jordan and I go into some detail in this podcast, and it will fundamentally change the way you look at your customer experience, your timeframes on shipping, and a lot of other things. A lot of great insights. It's a great report. Highly recommend it. This one is a must listen. I'd love to get your feedback in the comments below after the show. If your SEO isn't firing in 2026, let's get in touch with a free audit. We can either do an overall SEO audit or a Google Merchant Center audit. Get in touch and let's get your SEO firing. Hope you enjoy this episode. Cheers. A big welcome to Jordan Berke, CEO and founder of Tomorrow, a global strategic retail consulting firm based in New York. So Jordan, thanks for joining us.
Ryan, thank you. Love what you're doing and excited to jump in.
Thank you, mate. Now, you're making the trip down to Australia next week on behalf of the Australian Post e-commerce report for 2026. So Aus Post are bringing you out to Australia. Is that correct?
That's right. It's the best time of year. Every year, this report brings a pretty unique view on what's happening today and what's likely to happen tomorrow. And so I'm excited to be there and interpret it and talk with retailers across the country about how to lean in to all the amazing change that's happening in Australia right now.
Fantastic. What have you been to Australia before? Is this your first time, or what's your experience been like?
It's my favorite place to visit, and I typically am there every 3 to 4 months. It's such a dynamic market right now, Ryan, as you know better than I do, but we are so excited about the amount of change that's happening. Obviously, you've got the marketplaces that are really prioritizing Oz as a key growth market. You've got local players that are standing up and fighting for share in ways they never have. And so it's making it a really exciting time to be in the market, but also for consumers, because I think the lives of Aussies are getting better every quarter based on just how competitive the market is becoming. And so, yeah, we're there regularly, and we think it's a really interesting, important time.
Nice. And before we get into the report, there's a lot that I want to get through into that, because there's some great stats in there that I'm keen to get involved with. But where are you guys sort of based in all of the capital, in all of the major cities in Australia, or are you doing some regional stuff, or where can we find that information to share with our e-commerce retailers that might want to get along?
That's great. Well, Wednesday is the big day. The report will be available, published, and accessible. And the Aus Post has organized meetings across the country. So, of course, we'll be in Melbourne, Sydney, but there's going to be meetings around the country to really interpret it and talk about its practical implications on retailers, brands, and what it means. So I think it'll be pretty readily available wherever you are from next week on, but can't wait to have discussions when we have in-person time.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and the link will be in the show notes as well, so they can download it here as well. And I encourage everyone to do so. Download this and then give the podcast a listen whilst you're flicking through that, or maybe start with the podcast and then download the report. But I'm keen to get into it. So what's the most important piece of information or statistic that you found that's come out of the Australia Post e-commerce report this year?
Yeah, I think you're in an incredible moment of change. And I say that because first, e-commerce penetration in 2025 finally matched that of the EU, and in 2026 will pass it. So you'll actually go from being a market that's been behind to a market that's ahead. One of the greatest drivers of that, as you know, Ryan, is marketplaces are really hitting their stride in Australia like few markets globally. The percent of e-commerce going to marketplaces still is in the 24% range in Australia. That's less than half the market average globally. And so you've got tons of runway for all of the marketplaces that are trying to win that future. Of course, Amazon is leading the way currently, but you've got one of the most competitive races right now globally to figure out who's going to be that number one, number two, and number three, given the amount of headroom that marketplaces have. So I think that is a very important headline takeaway, but there's many others I'm excited to unpack with you.
Yeah, exactly. And a couple of my notes before we get into, I'll probably go to the executive summary with you next, but just a couple of notes. My overall kind of view was just around how constant the customer journey and the expectations are really shifting. And if your business doesn't shift with them, you can really take a hit in reputation and revenue. That was the biggest takeaway for me overall. It's just, sometimes you can kind of sit there and play your own game a little bit and not realize how quickly the consumer expectations are shifting. So this report does a really good job of highlighting that as well. And I thought it's just a good statistic that, Aussie spent 86.2 billion in e-commerce last year, so 14% up on prior year. So it's good to see that kind of bounce back. We're a fair way from COVID, but obviously we had that nice COVID spike, and then things have softened a bit. So it's good to see that increase as well.
Ryan, your point on the amount of improvement that's happening in user experiences, how important it is to keep up, is so essential because you're in really a hyper growth mode. That 14% is higher than most markets globally in
Okay.
terms of growth. And that's being driven on such improvements in customer experience. We're going to talk in a minute about speed and how important it is you as a brand, as an e-commerce player, understand the speed shift that's happening. We're going to talk about user experience and how much better the user experience is for an average Aussie experience this year than it was last year. We're going to talk about agentic and how that's just accelerating that user experience improvement, So there are really a lot of things to make sure you're keeping up with, if not leading as a brand and retailer in the market. Now is the time.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the key things that they come out of the report with, the Iconic, they cited that every day delayed for a product to be delivered, they had a loss between 3 and 10% of conversion rate, which was super interesting. But we'll get to that a bit later down the track. So do you want to start with the executive summary? Let's start there. So what I found, a couple of interesting points, is shopper promiscuity is rising. I like the word. I've never seen it used in that context before, but shopper promiscuity is rising, purchase frequency is growing, and the delivery experience is improving. What are your take on some of those 3 points?
All three are critical signals. I'm actually more encouraged by the first one than the second one because I think what it represents is the increasing competitiveness of the Aussie market. I think for many years, customers in Australia weren't getting the best in the world experiences. And part of that was you didn't have global competitors in the market. Local players weren't as assertive and aggressive. And that's what's changed in the last 24 months. And so I think you're getting customers that are shopping around because every month Amazon improves something, as does Woolies, as does Kmart, as does Temu and Shein. You're getting a vibrancy in the competitive environment that customers are recognizing. And so that's exciting. The second point is speed. And we find globally that the biggest trigger of conversion rate, as the Iconic represented, to your point, is reduction in time to door, that delivery speed. If you can take that from a 5-day to a 3-day promise, 10% minimum conversion rate improvement, usually more like 20, 30, 40. And the moment you take that to same day, you're getting another delta that's very similar. And so you're seeing incredible progress on speed across the market. And that's another big part of it. And one of the areas I'm going to be talking about when I'm there is the on-demand era and how you're seeing the growth of Uber, DoorDash, and the same hour experience becoming commonplace across the country. And that's, again, leveling up that speed expectation. So yeah, I think the shopping around nature is actually a good sign of improvements in experience and competitive density.
Yeah, fantastic. And to your point there, the report also sort of calls out that households now are shopping across an average of 16 brands a year, and that figure has been growing for the last decade, according to the Aus Post report. So that backs up your point nicely there. How do e-commerce businesses that are currently kind of a 3-day turnaround, what is the process for speeding that up? Do they need to have, better logistics? Do they need to have that conversation with their 3PL? Like, what's the execution look like on that?
Yeah, great question. How do you go from a 3 to 5-day promise to a 1 to 2-day promise? It's something that actually requires the whole business end to end to get behind. You've got to, of course, look at what is my inventory placement and how am I making sure I've got the right inventory close enough to a customer to deliver on that faster promise. So that means looking at your fulfillment network and where are you warehousing, or are you leveraging stores, and how are you using stores? But how am I getting the right inventory close enough to customers to be within that shorter promise? Second, how am I making sure that facility is working efficiently, because as you compress that promise, every hour, every minute counts. So how am I making sure that order transfers are happening quick enough, that the facility's picking, packing, handing over quick enough? Here's a great one, Ryan. When you're going to a faster promise, you need your last mile delivery partner to be faster. So they've got to be at that facility more frequently. They've got to be scanning in more quickly. They've got to be getting it to customers faster. So everything has to get compressed. Everything is more precise. And that's why we say you've got to have a full business view of what am I doing that's slowing me down, and how am I making sure I'm turning the corner on that so that I can lean into speed. What's exciting is you're not doing it alone. You're in an era where many e-commerce players are really working to get fast. Amazon is setting the bar. Outside of Australia, their same day proposition is the most disruptive thing that's happened in retail in the last 5 years. Let me say that again. Amazon going to same day fulfillment in the US, Canada, UK has had a bigger impact on retail sales than anything else we've seen done online or offline in those markets. And so as they get to same day in Sydney, Melbourne, the Gold Coast, across the country, it is going to elevate customer expectations in a way that everyone's got to recognize and figure out how to get faster.
Yeah, perfect. And that's great insight. And one of the conversations that we've been having down here is exactly that. How do you compete against the Amazons and some of these bigger marketplaces that just have speed? And this report clearly shows that speed is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, factor to improving conversion and getting more customers through the door or through your e-com site.
Yeah, what's exciting is that speed is a critical dimension, but it's not the only dimension. And I think another aspect we've watched in Australia over the last 2 years is marketplaces, including local leaders, being able to improve the experience, not just in speed, but in selection, having more high quality, trusted product, in price value, having better pricing, more precise promo, having more personalization, getting the user experience to know customers better so they don't have to search through millions of SKUs. It's curated. And then returns, making sure that it's easy, and where possible, a store is able to help facilitate that return. So there's all these dimensions of how you close the trust gap, we call it, as a marketplace. And we think that we've seen great change, great improvement, great momentum among leaders in the market.
Yeah, fantastic. I want to get onto sort of consumer expectations and how do you think they're going to shop in 2026? But I just wanted to jump in with another question that I had just off the back of some of your answers there. When it comes to product discoverability, and we'll get into the agentic AI conversation shortly as well, but how do you find product discoverability in 2026? Looking at this report, it obviously breaks down. There's a lot more nuance than that versus which is millennial, Gen Z, Gen X. It kind of depends on your audience. But how do we as e-commerce businesses and founders get our products discovered?
Yeah, Ryan, this is probably the dimension that's got the most change and that we've got to learn more than any other. Why? Because up until about a year ago, search engine optimization, great product listing quality, great attributes was the baseline to being able to get discovered. But today there are two new muscles that are essential to build. One is agentic and how to influence prompts and context, which we'll talk about. And another is content and how to make sure that you're showing up in TikTok and IG and the feeds of your customer so that you're influencing there. Those two areas are almost as important as traditional search today. And we believe by the end of 2026, we'll surpass.
Well,
And so
okay.
you've got to figure out, how do you as a business make sure that you're evolving your product page from what we call an attribute era to a contextual era, where as you and I are on ChatGPT, we're conversing in a way that's far more native to humans than search. And so to be found in that prompt result, your product needs to have much more contextual relevance. It's got to know how the product should be used, where it's used most effectively. You've got to evolve from attributes to context. And at the same time, as people save more time using agents, Ryan, we think they're going to spend more time on content platforms. They're going to be actually scrolling more on TikTok, YouTube, and others. And so you've got to make sure that influencers and customers are talking about your products there, so that you're getting discoverability in the inspiration time, just like you're getting discovery in that kind of efficient, get me to my solution time. So it's a really cool time to be in, call it the item content business, because you've got to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
evolving dramatically.
I like that. What was it? The agent, the product. What did you call that then? Product
From the
content business?
yeah, being in anyone who is on the sort of what we call the site operation side of an e-commerce business, responsible for product content, responsible for
Product content.
taxonomy,
Yeah.
man, they're in the most exciting, if not scary, place in the business right now because of the amount of change. We're going to share in our meetings the amount of AI-driven traffic that's come to Walmart, Target US, Amazon over the holiday period, particularly, and the increase in that of about 700% year over year versus 2024, and how that's now making up about 1% of total traffic to those platforms. But at a 700% growth clip, you can imagine that becomes material very quickly. And so figuring out how to influence and grow that is part of that contextual content side.
Yeah, yeah. So let's touch on agentic AI, sort of, because the conversation has sort of naturally flowed that way. What does that look like, and what's happening in the States that Australian retailers can learn from that?
Yeah. So Ryan, we're in a stage in 2026 where leading retailers in the US are focused on figuring out two sides of the agentic question. The first side is what we call the off-platform side, which is how are customers using AI platforms, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, to research and shop. The second is what we call the on-platform side, which is when they're on my app, the Walmart app on Amazon. How do they expect to use agentic to be able to
Mm,
research and shop? Right. So that first frame is they've got to have a clarity in what is happening off platform and what is happening on platform. And what you're seeing is leading retailers are trying to make sure they can win in both of those contexts. So the first step is nearly all of them are figuring out, how do I embed into AI platforms so that the customer that's using ChatGPT to research their trip is able to find me, shop me, engage with me effectively, and I'm not losing out that trip. It will talk about some real-time pivots that are happening in that space. It's a very fluid, interesting, yet to be determined, the winners and the winning use cases. We'll come back to that. But then there's the on-platform where all of those players are also figuring out, how do I make sure I've got an agentic experience embedded in my app so that the customer that loves GPT, when they come onto my platform, I'm not sending them back 5 years into a search. I'm bringing them
mm.
forward in an agentic conversation with my platform. And so if you look at Rufus on Amazon, which is yet to come to Oz, but is pretty effective in North America, Europe now, that's their agentic experience. Sparky is Walmart's equivalent of that. It's starting to see some pretty material usage numbers. And so retailers are finding, okay, how do I make sure I'm embedded if that's what the customer needs? How do I make sure I'm native Gen AI on my platform if that's what the customer expects? And it's really a race to figure out who's going to learn and break through with that first.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. So when it comes to sort of being found on ChatGPT, traditionally I run a SEO business, so traditional SEO has still worked pretty well up until now. But even looking at this report there's a lot more emphasis on really structured, clean data and as much information as you can feed to those AI engines.
Man, I want to get your point of view on this because, yeah, you're at the tip of the spear. I'll share what we're seeing, but would love to get your perspective also on what's working, what's not. But so I mentioned this idea of evolving from an attribute-driven product strategy or product page to a contextual-driven product page. And so what we're seeing is that prompts or LLMs, they are formulating responses based on a ton of contextual inputs, contextual content about a product. And so I use the example of I'm heading to Bondi for a surf. I'm wondering what sun protection I should be using given I've got sensitive skin. I'm bringing my 14-year-old. She's got a different skin
Mm,
profile. Let me know what you think. That experience is so much richer than the typical I'm on Amazon sunblock SPF 40, right?
yeah.
Sunblock SPF 40 attributes can determine what's going to be the best fit for that. But that conversation I just had with ChatGPT on my situation heading to Bondi is much richer. And so what we're finding retailers doing is figuring out, how do I add content to my product descriptions, sometimes not even visible on my platform, but in some way a meta tag model that makes sure that the LLMs are absorbing that contextual relevance. And then how do I go into the pools of content that LLMs rely on, Wikipedia, Reddit, and make sure I'm flooding those with native content that when it comes to that item, they read that, for instance, Walmart, maybe in your case, Woolies, has the best sunblock for families who have these different conditions. And here are the 2 best items that you need, and you're good to go. And so it's really like, I don't know, an upping of the game, if you will, from the SEO era where getting attributes really consistent and clean, still important, but now you've got to add to that context that we never had a use for until now.
Yeah, spot on. That's such a good explanation as well with the long, traditionally sort of SEO has moved away from kind of the head keywords to then long tail search. And now conversational commerce or contextual commerce as well is another good way to put it. So how do you get your product to be found in some of those? And you pretty much nailed it there. I would also add just other rich mediums, rich media, I should say. So Instagram, YouTube Shorts, anything that can kind of help showcase some of those scenarios is always going to help as well. I think Gary V, we all know Gary V.
Yeah.
Every business is kind of a media production kind of first, and then they sell something second, and it's probably panning out to be, more accurate than ever before in the current sort of environment as we move through that agentic AI. But I'm keen to kind of get your thoughts on what's that experience like for me as a consumer if I'm going to use my own AI agent to do my shopping for me. We've talked about how to discover different products, but how does that then work when I'm utilizing an AI agent to do my shopping for me? Is that it feels like that might be a race to the bottom, just get to the cheapest product or the most trusted. What's your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah. Ryan, it is the $1 trillion question, which is, will we shop inside a ChatGPT or Gemini in a way that's native and feels like a marketplace? Our thesis currently is probably not. And why do I say that? First, what do I mean by, is it going to be like a marketplace? Are you going to ask ChatGPT to set you up for your trip to Bondi for a surf day and just get me everything I need? And I'm not interested in who you get it from. Just figure it out based on some criteria and get it to me. We think that's highly unlikely, at least any time in the next 10 years. Why?
Okay.
Because in order for ChatGPT to deliver that experience to you, they need to be a fully integrated operational marketplace where they need to have all the selection that you need from that experience. They need to have it located in convenience, close enough to you to be able to deliver it. Remember where we started the conversation on getting to next day, same day delivery. They need to have it ready to deliver that to you in the speed that you expect. They need that pricing to be really accurate and tight and meeting your expectations. They need to know you and have your loyalty information so that you're getting rewarded for that. They need to be integrated both with the inventory, which is generally from a retailer, and with you in a way that is very difficult to achieve. And so we think the chance of them investing in the infrastructure, and I'm going to say replicating Amazon, just for simple terms, is very low. Okay. And even this week's signal, and we're recording this on a Thursday, March 12th, right? So even this week, ChatGPT announcing it's walking away from an integrated checkout experience is a signal that they recognize that trying to be the marketplace where Ryan shops both for sunblock and fresh produce, and that comes in one order to you, trying to be that is probably beyond even what OpenAI can do. And so what they've converted to is what we think is more likely, which is they allow retailers and brands to create branded mini programs or apps, they're calling them, inside ChatGPT, where you as a consumer in 5 years can say, hey, ChatGPT, open my Walmart app, and I'd like to get these 4 things delivered to this place, and make sure that you're using my Walmart Plus, which is my membership, to get me free delivery on that. And thank you very much.
Okay.
Where because it's Walmart, it's got Walmart's full assortment. You can trust that it's going to come all in one delivery, or at least in a convenient, efficient way. and you're going to trust those prices and know that if it's coming from Walmart or if it's coming from whoever retailer, I'm happy. So we think they become, to the consumer, call it a media layer, kind of like TikTok is now, right? I shop on TikTok. I say, hey, send that to me. I don't ask TikTok to form a basket for me. I'm shopping directly from that seller, that influencer. We see that being more likely to be the future. And if you want to see the future, if you want to understand what that looks like, look no further than China, where WeChat has created that experience for retailers over the last decade. And that's where every retailer in the country sells inside WeChat in a mini program. We think that's probably where Sam Altman and Sunder's vision is going. So long answer, but the question, the $1 trillion question, actually a pretty exciting future for retailers and brands, because we think that the risk of disintermediation is low, and the chance to be able to improve user experiences and compete in that new environment is high.
I want to ask you about live shopping, which sort of feeds in nicely to that WeChat conversation. Do you think Google and Gemini are going to win this kind of AI browser race, or are the people in the US using ChatGPT a lot more? Is there any kind of talk around, who's going to win in this AI search engine era?
There's tons of talk, Ryan, and it's just that nobody knows.
Yeah.
Right. And we're in a true race to the future form factor of the internet. So this is as significant a race as it gets. And so everyone is trying to fight their way. And yes, ChatGPT and Gemini appear today to be the leaders. Claude is making breakthroughs every week that might bring them to the leadership position soon. Obviously, X is trying to figure its path, as is Amazon. So yeah, Meta, you name it. But yeah, today, just to answer your question, ChatGPT and Gemini are the most commonly used by consumers to research anything related to merchandise or decisions in life on our personal side.
Okay, nice one. So I just mentioned live shopping there before, but live shopping has never really kind of been a thing here in Australia. I feel like maybe we've just been talking about it and we're still a bit early, but it's on its way. Can you talk to the live shopping experience, whether it's in China or the US, and what opportunities you think lie for Australian retailers when it comes to that?
Ryan, I love the question because it's one that I've spent 10 years thinking about, and one where you mentioned Gary Vee. He and I have a pretty strong disagreement. Why?
Okay.
I got to experience live shopping in China. I led, as we've talked about, e-commerce for Walmart and Sam's Club in China for 13 years. And so we did some of the first live streams ever for Walmart. And I saw the power of live shopping. What I found in the West is that most of us are not interested in scheduled shopping, where we have to be online live streaming at a certain moment in order to take advantage of an opportunity. As rich and dynamic and exciting as it is, what we're finding is that video shopping is incredible, but live scheduled video shopping doesn't seem to resonate as well. And so we see the most opportunity for brands and retailers that produce video content or have influencers and customers that are out generating that video content that show up in the feeds of our customers, but don't require you to be there at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday to take advantage of the opportunity. And so we know Whatnot is really interesting, and we're really excited to see, are they able to finally change that trajectory? Because IG Live didn't, you name it, Shop Shops didn't. There's been so many attempts to get Westerners to embrace that very Chinese live shopping experience. And what we've seen to date, most of the value is in short form, pre-recorded video that drives shopping, but it's not scheduled and live. So we'll be really watching this closely because, man, we love ourselves a good live shop. It just hasn't seemed to resonate with most Western consumers yet.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess when you look at the way that we consume media and you want to look at Netflix versus free-to-air TV, the statistics are backing up the fact that people want to watch it when it suits them on demand, as opposed to having to be home at 8:30 or 9 o'clock to watch the show, or you don't see it. So your opinion there probably starts to back up some of those statistics around how we consume media more widely. So that's a really good point when it comes to live shopping. How do smaller and challenger brands compete against the Temus and the Sheins and the Amazons in Australia? I know that there's a lot of e-commerce retailers that have been hit hard by some of those bigger, much bigger companies that have come to Australia and selling products that a quarter of the price. How do we compete? I think we probably touched on one when it comes to shortening your delivery time. But have you got any other thoughts on how brands can compete or provide a point of difference for some of those?
Absolutely, Ryan. I think we have to think of that question in kind of two different cohorts or two different customers that we're thinking on behalf. Let's first think on behalf of brands, independent, small to mid-sized brands. And in that community, the importance of differentiation and understanding what you stand for is more important than ever. But the good news is that's not new. From day one, no creator of a product sets out to replicate somebody else's and only win on price. You've got to figure out what is it that's unique about your product, your proposition, and how do you lean in and bring that uniqueness to life in every experience that you're creating for customers, from the product itself to content to the agentic conversation that it's able to help facilitate. So I think the most critical word for any brand right now is differentiation, and how to make sure that you're clear on how you're differentiating and you're living it in everything you do as a brand. If you're not doing that, I guarantee you're swimming upstream, and it's going to be very difficult to be able to drive customer adoption, loyalty, volume, because cheap is easy, and it is now more prevalent than ever. And so you've got to find ways to differentiate. The second group that we should talk about is, how do you as a big retailer make sure that you're not being vulnerable and beaten by low price, let's say, global platforms. And there you've got to also really know what it is that you do different and better than those players can, and how do you bring that to life. And so, yes, by having your physical presence in the market, having physical connection to customers in the market, you've got to make sure that you're maximizing the benefit of physical, and making sure, whether it's an in-store experience or an online experience, the role of that store in educating customers on product, in giving them access, fast, convenient, low-cost access, critical. But you've also got to make sure that your digital user experience is world-class. And this is something that I'm very honest with Australian retailers about, is up until recently, you didn't need a world-class e-com experience to be able to get by. That era is gone, Ryan, and you know it better than anyone, but come on. We are no longer an island. We are no longer in our own era, and mediocre experiences are fine. You are competing with the world's best. And so if your front-end experience isn't incredibly rich, intuitive, engaging, if getting that product and checking out isn't fast and easy, if getting it delivered isn't fast and easy, forget it. You're just not going to be relevant for long. And so it's an important time to embrace that we are in the best in class era now in Australia. And so we've got to up our game, because otherwise there are a lot of global players that love the growth that Australia represents. And so I think it's only going to get harder. So it's an exciting time, but it's one where we've got to really step up. And I know a lot of the community are embracing that and driving that.
Yeah, 100%. And getting back to the report that we're sort of referencing here today, on page 13, you can see it references like the checkout experience and how much it matters. And that goes to your point about actually being world class when it comes to having that customer experience or the customer journey dialed in. 52% of Australians abandoned a checkout because the process was too long, and that went to 67% for higher spenders as well. So that's a massive drop off if you get that last page wrong, or the user experience hasn't been factored in or optimized to the best that it can be.
Percent. And that could mean you weren't clear up front
Yeah.
on delivery time. It could mean that there's an added delivery fee that wasn't clear up front. There are so many ways that you can drop the ball right when you're at the end zone. And so, yeah, that's a great dimension of what being world-class looks like. You've got to get that end-to-end journey to be easy, intuitive, personalized, rich, where inspiration's important.
And I think the other one too that I liked is on page 21. We're talking about the out-of-home delivery options as well.
Yes.
Very important. Like, I live in an apartment, and I know that the courier can't get in because it's all secure. so I get it delivered to work. But what I found quite interesting was just the having the extra options, whether you use Australia Post and having those parcel lockers as an example, that really improves conversion and trust, and people are much more likely to convert because it's convenient for them to utilize some of those out-of-home delivery options as well.
It's an aspect of e-commerce that in markets where it's great, it's a game changer. I mentioned in the US where we've not built a locker culture, and it's a negative. It's a downside of the
Okay.
e-commerce market here. Why? A, the cost of delivery is higher because of that. Every shipment is direct to doorstep. B, there is a
Mm.
risk element to it. And the whole porch pirate community is built on the idea that packages are sitting on porches and so vulnerable. And third, I think from a missed delivery standpoint, every so often someone's not home. They can't sign for that delivery. They can't get that delivery. And so it's a redelivery situation or a return. And so lockers in Germany and Poland and China, where they're mature and common, are a huge positive to the e-commerce business and to customers.
Yeah, yeah, spot on. And I didn't even touch on that, but yeah, the privacy or the theft aspect of that is one thing. And then, you just might be out to 11 o'clock that night or whatever, but you ordered something next day delivery and you needed it for the next day. If you miss that courier, that yeah, you're done, And so then that gives you more risk as a retailer or an e-commerce business because you could start to get returns or people don't need that item anymore. So yeah, it really leaves yourself vulnerable and open. So definitely consider those sort of out of home parcel lockers or at least having that option. One of the report also calls is really just at least having options for people to actually choose how they want it. I was going to say, it again referencing this report, what it does a really good job of as well is breaking down like the Gen Z versus millennials versus Gen X and the different and what's important to them. So nuance is really key here, but I would encourage you once you digest the report to have a look at who your target audience is and what's important to them. If you want to just call out quickly whilst I've got it up here, millennials between 1981 to 1997, convenience is the top motivator for online shopping for them, as opposed to, the baby boomers who value delivery certainty much higher than speed. So they want to know that they're actually going to get the product in 3 days, as opposed to sort of one day and they miss it. So there's a lot of nuance that we're talking about, and it's well worth looking at the report. Yeah, at least I think that's one of the biggest takeaways is just having options for people to receive their packages in different ways that's unique to them. It's going to be convenient to them. It's really going to help your conversion rate.
We're going to talk about click and collect a lot as we're at the Aus Post releases, because it's also a medium or mode that customers love. And we find that retailers typically see between 20 and 50% of customers adding an item. When they've done a click and collect order and they're in store to pick it up, they'll add an extra item that is often incremental, not something that would have been bought that day from that retailer that you're capturing. So optionality is everything.
Wow.
Click and collect, out of home via lockers, and speed to door, all really important as you get to world class.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've covered that report pretty well. I really appreciate your time. Obviously, you've spent your entire career or certainly the last 7 or 8 years in the retail consulting landscape on a global scale, and to have access to someone of your insights to sort of go through this report together has been fantastic. I don't think I've ever had someone who's not Australian, but I think you come here enough that we can call you an Australian.
Ryan, that is my dream. I hope someday to be credibly Aussie, but I know I've got a long way to go. But thank you. As I said, you're in such an exciting time in the Australian e-commerce market. So appreciate what you're doing. You're helping the community every week. Listen, I love Durand. You had some really interesting conversations. So really appreciate the chance to contribute.
Perfect, mate. Looking forward to seeing you when you come down here next week. And yeah, again, appreciate your time.
Thank you.